This podcast is a proud member of the Unidentified Network.
So now, ladies and gentlemen, live and in colour, it's Mr. Wayne Lovejuice.
The other day our producer Louis had a chat with an interesting chappie who said that the YouTube algorithm really aren't that happy. If a channel only broadcasts once a week, so we decided we could Xtra whenever we've got a piece of news in our new book on the track Xtra.
Well, good evening ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of On the Track Xtra. For those of you who don't know, every Wednesday evening at 6:30 for about a quarter of an hour, but quite often considerably more, and every Saturday afternoon at 3 for about twice that, we bring you a show which is a mixture of hard science, weird shit and surreality. During the weekend show, the Saturday show, we also give you a peculiar taste of what surreality actually is. Something like this. Well, this episode we are going to be talking about the latest issue of Flying Snake magazine that has arrived from my old friend Richard Muirhead. But before we do that, a brief update on what happened in last week's episode. You'll remember that we had Gwyn telling us all about what she's doing with atlas moth caterpillars and how one atlas moth caterpillar looked as if he wasn't going to be able to make a cocoon properly, and how she took advice and was told how to deal with this. Now here is an update, the latest bit of news on the errant atlas moth caterpillar. Well, this is the first time I've ever seen an atlas moth chrysalis. You can see, if you look closely, how so much of what is going to become the adult moth is already partly formed. You can see its antennae. You can see the buds for what's going to be its wings. And according to Gwyn, it twitches sometimes, the same as a butterfly chrysalis does. So it's still alive and it's still developing. Here you can see the remains of its last echidiosis, the skin shed. So that's the last bit of the caterpillar's skin, which Gwyn cleverly removed so you can all see it. I think she's doing remarkably well, and I've asked her to let us know not only how it pans out, but also to film the developing chrysalis over the next few weeks until it emerges as a fully fledged atlas moth. Now, I know that some of the pedants amongst you, and yes, the pedants are revolting, are going to say, well, a moth can't be fully fledged because it doesn't have feathers. Well, okay, if you can think of a better word than fully fledged for an adult atlas moth who finally has the use of his or her wings, please tell me and put it in the comments below, and I will use that term from now on. Now, this arrived the other day, and I've been very much looking forward to opening it. You can tell from the handwriting that it's from my old friend Richard Muirhead, who is somebody I've known since I was 11 and he was 6. Have a look here. It is. At least I strongly suspect it is. In fact, if it isn't, I'm really going to have buggered up my whole content of this issue. And it is the latest episode, the latest issue of Flying Snake magazine. And it has on the front cover the picture of the strange cat from Cheshire that we featured in the show some months ago. So, just going to go through it and we'll see what's in this issue. I've got to stop calling magazine issues episodes, and then I've got to stop calling episodes issues, because I always manage to get them wrong, because I'm an idiot. Now, what do we have here? We start off with a Dr. Devo's diary, which I always like, because as I explain each time we go through one of these magazines, Richard Muirhead is obsessed with a band called Devo, who wear funny plastic hats, and one year I spent the whole of the advertising budget for the Weird Weekend buying him one of those silly hats all the way from America so I could give it to him as a prize. And so anyway, Dr. Devo's diary says what's going to be in this issue. And now this is quite interesting. We talk about Wales, not the country that has a welcome in the hillside, but the things that aren't fish. He's talking about whales, dragons and crocodiles in churches. And here, for example, I don't know if you can see it. Let's see if you can see it. You can see whale ribs in a church in Cologne. And the one of these that I'm most interested in is the skeleton of what's supposed to be a sea monster in a monastery on Corfu. I think it's a monastery on what used to be called Mouse Island on Corfu, which Gerald Dole writes about, in which there is the skeleton of a so-called sea monster, which I've seen photographs. It's obviously a whale, but what species of whale and why and how it ended up in the monastery as a sea monster, I have no idea. Well, there are also apparently mummified crocodiles. This is interesting, because this is a mummified crocodile on the church in the Piazza San Marco in Venice, St. Mark's Square. And I went there a long time ago when I was about 11, and no, I got it completely wrong. It's not there at all. It's another church in another Piazza San Marco. I don't know why St. Mark had so many squares named after him. In fact, I know very little about St. Mark, but this one is in Verona, the place where apparently not only Romeo and Juliet took place, but there were two gentlemen, according to Shakespeare. I love this magazine because it's full of all sorts of peculiar things that just come out, and you find stuff in here that really you wouldn't find in any other magazine. I think it's massively entertaining. It's the sort of magazine that when I do collected editions, and it's about time we did another collected edition of them. This one is issue 29, and so I think we're going to have to do issues 6 to 10 as a paperback book very soon. And they're the sort of things that I like to keep in the bathroom as a sort of Cabinet of Curiosities, the sort of thing people like to read when in the bog, or I do anyway. Over there I can see Miss Isabel laughing because I said bog. It's like in, I think it was last week's episode, it might have been the week before, the one when we were talking about those birds called boobies. I used the term top bollocks and she nearly peed herself and fell off her chair. Now we have an article on the strangeness of Skinwalker Ranch by Shane Lee and Richard Muirhead. I'm very, very fond of Shane Lee. He's a good bloke. I've known him for a long, long, long time. And it's interesting about the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. It's always fascinated me. Utah has always fascinated me. It's a very strange place. I've only been there a couple of times. And it is very, very peculiar. And there's, I don't know, something about what was once a theocracy run by Mormons is particularly weird. Unless, of course, you want to have multiple wives. Do I want multiple wives? No, I don't think I do. I've had 2, and they were very nice indeed. But the idea of having more than one wife at a time would actually just do my head in. Now we have Ulrich Megan again talking about a deadly species of scorpion from the Ukraine. Now that is the sort of esoteric weirdness that makes me happy. Then we have a collection of odds and sods from Paul Screeton. Paul Screeton is a very interesting bloke. I've known him for years. He wrote a book for us about the Hexham Heads, and this includes creatures that look like raccoons, an albino frog, a portal to fairyland, a crystal portal to fairyland in Carlisle of all places, and all sorts of other wonderful things. Then you have Mystery Cats of East Cheshire by Richard Muirhead, which is very, very similar to the article, to the episode that me and Richard did about his mystery cat photographs from East Cheshire. Then we have a creature, an article by Carl Schuker, which is about something called the Gabali, which is a Liberian mystery reptile, about which I've vaguely heard but know very little about, and it gives a whole string of possibilities for what this creature is, so, including several species of crocodile, some dinosaurs, and all sorts of other reptiles. Personally, just from the picture at the beginning, I think it looks like a weird monitor lizard, but that's another story. Now we have somebody called Greg Brick, of who I've not heard, Dr. Greg Brick, talking about visitors from the Ice Age world, talking about caves in America, which were supposed by the original inhabitants of the country to be the abode of the Great Spirit and to be great Ice Age caves that had strange creatures living in them. Absolutely fantastic. And then we have my dear friend Lois Moderman, who's somebody I'm very fond of. She does all sorts of interesting things in Holland. And with this, she's talking about the strange story of Beeling's bells, and it's all about a story about various peculiar church bells, especially those around a place called Great Beeling's House, situated in the village of Great Beeling's near Ipswich in Suffolk. I am so impressed by the way that Lois and all the other contributors to this magazine come up with such wonderful stuff. Okay, here we have now On the Identity of Large Birds of Prey Reported in New Zealand, Part 2, by Lana Thilo, and is looking to see what these giant birds are. Are they Haast's eagle, which is what so many people like to think they are, or are they something else entirely? I didn't know, for example, about the extinct species of harriers from New Zealand. In fact, I knew very little about the prehistoric fauna of New Zealand, apart from the moas, which everybody knows about. Now we have Richard Muirhead with an article called "Did the Japanese Release Their Poisonous Snakes into British Hong Kong?" Well, as everybody who watches my show or reads any of my inky-fingered scribblings will know that I do have an abiding interest in Hong Kong, because that's where Richard and I were boys. And between 1941 and 1945, Hong Kong, which was a British colony at the time, was captured by the Japanese, and the Imperial Japanese Army did the most appalling atrocities. And yes, I too had heard the story about them releasing poisonous snakes into the colony, but Richard goes into it in far greater depth. Then we have a Dartmoor story from Mark Rains. Well, it's nice to read stuff from Mark Rains, and this is about something called Holocombe Bottom. And it's followed by Tabitha Cope, who's another old friend of ours, with an article about lake monsters in Mongolia. Again, something about which I know very little. And this ends up with a collection of odds and sods. A duck with a crossbow bolt stuck in its head, alive still 2 years after it was shot. A new species of crab discovered in the South China Sea. 2 peculiar bear-like animals from a Japanese archive, which we have no idea what they are. An eagle-like bird in County Wexford. New species of spider in Cornwall. A giant spider in Canada. And flying snakes in Wales. And that takes us to the end of this issue, and it ends up with some lovely artwork by Lois Moderman, who, like I said earlier, is a very, very talented lady. And I would recommend you check out her website, which is called scienceart.com, I think. It might be scienceart.nl, I'm not sure, I think it's .com. And that's the end of this episode and the end of this issue. I hope you enjoyed it. I sincerely recommend that you contact Richard Freeman. Oh, why am I getting my two Richards mixed up? Contact Richard Muirhead. You can find him on Facebook, and he will tell you exactly how you can buy this wonderful magazine and subscribe for future issues. I seriously suggest that you do so, because this is one of the joys of my life, that 3 or 4 times a year along comes a copy of this magazine, which makes me very happy indeed. Well done, Richard. Well done to everyone involved, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, I'm back on Saturday. What am I doing on Saturday? We're going to have the next part of Richard Freeman's look at the bottom 10, the 10 cryptids least likely to exist, and he's going to carry on ruffling feathers and causing trouble. So I wouldn't miss it if I were you. And if you're there watching, and I'll be there doing the whatchamacallit, the live chat and the notifications and everything, then I'll be seeing you. Good.